Your Holiness, it's indeed a great privilege and a great blessing for me to be here. We've spoken so much about His Holiness being the embodiment of compassion, and as a very unworthy student of more than 30 years, for me personally, the greatest example has been his great compassion for suffering students such as me. Your Holiness, you've often described yourself as the Chela of the Indian Guru. Thousands of years have passed since Buddhism traveled to Tibet. We are deeply grateful, and I speak here on behalf of more than 1 billion Indians, that the Chela has now become our Guru. And so on behalf of more than 1 billion Indians, I give you, on their behalf, and me as an unworthy, failing student, our warmest, sincere birthday greetings, that every happiness ever be yours. We celebrate you, Your Holiness, not just for what you say or what you do, but who you are. Watching him has been a great privilege, and he has embodied at every step and with every breath all that he teaches and all that he preaches. So he is not just what he does, but who he is. And it is who he is that we celebrate, because the rest really follows from who he is. We celebrate, Your Holiness, as I said, for who you are, but for the manner in which you have embodied the highest aspiration of the human condition. It is His Holiness who gives us the hope that as travelers on the journey of spirituality, of journey of human perfection, it is when we look at you, Your Holiness, that we find the confidence that that aspiration, that perfection, that goal of seekers is indeed possible in human form. Your Holiness, amongst the many aspects of the common predicament of mankind today that you stand for, has been your deep passion and commitment to interreligious dialogue. You have had the courage, Your Holiness, to put on a skull cap, to go to a mosque and perform the namaz, and to move on to a church with a cross around your neck and to sing a Christian hymn, or to go to a Hindu temple and perform those practices and rituals of different traditions. So for His Holiness, his passion, his commitment to what he talks about isn't manifest merely in words, but in the outer reaches of his striving and his action. He's 80 years old, but he's still a student. He spends 6, 7, 8 hours a day in religious practice, still receives instruction and transmission from lamas younger than him. I could go on here as a eulogy to a great master, but I will conclude merely with a traditional prayer, a long life prayer to His Holiness, if my cell phone doesn't let me down, and here it is. O our Gurus and your line of Lamas, for whom we have the deepest gratitude, you who are the repository of the 3 secret powers of body, speech and mind, of innumerable traditions and Buddhas, who manifest in miraculous ways to each of your students and followers according to his capacity, to you who are the wish-fulfilling gems, the source of all virtues and good qualities, we offer our prayers with intense devotion, that the protector of the great land of snows, Tenzin Gyatso, upholder of virtue and the highest spiritual aspiration, the great ocean, his name translates as ocean of wisdom, the Dalai Lama, may you live for 100 eons and may blessings pour on you that your aspirations as a bodhisattva, a Buddha who seeks consciously and chooses rebirth and the suffering of the human condition to teach and serve humanity. So may Your Holiness have a long life and continue to shower us with your blessings. And in the tradition of Hindi, the major language of India, Aapki Janamdin ka Shubhkamana.
And now some comments from Rajiv Mehrotra, who has been a student of His Holiness the Dalai Lama for some 30 years and helps run the Dalai Lama Foundation, which was started after His Holiness won the Nobel Peace Prize. Rajiv.
We're deeply blessed and privileged to be meeting here in the presence of one of the great teachers of our times. I think when the history of our times is written, His Holiness the Dalai Lama's name will be etched in history as the preeminent teacher. And I think it's very appropriate that we discuss the ideas around education in his presence. What makes him unique is that not only is he a preeminent teacher, but he is also, at age 80, a preeminent student. He embodies the highest aspirations of the Indo-Tibetan civilizational heritage, which juxtaposed training of the mind with the acquiring of knowledge. And that was circumscribed in turn with what His Holiness so profoundly manifests and is the motivation behind it. So it was more than 2,500 years ago under the Bodhi tree when Prince Siddhartha, left the palace. And he left the palace in search of an understanding about the human condition that would liberate human beings from suffering. So his motivation was not just the end of his suffering, but the end of suffering of all humankind. And so the motivation that drives His Holiness's quest for knowledge and training the mind is the insight and wisdom that will liberate not just him from the suffering of the human condition, but all of us. And it is this, in some ways, that is the difference, perhaps the distinction between the Western sensibility of education. The purpose, the pursuit of education, as I mentioned, bringing together both training the mind and acquiring knowledge, and the purpose for which you seek to do this. Not merely to further your careers, not merely that we can ensure a livelihood, that is not important, but that is not the dominant imperative. And behind His Holiness is a simple Buddhist monk, Tenzin Gyatso, and who if he hadn't been the Dalai Lama, could have well been Dr. Tenzin Gyatso, because he started his education as after he was discovered as a Dalai Lama, went through the rigors of a traditional Tibetan education, and in public debate had to win his spurs as a geishe, which is the equivalent of a doctorate. So it wasn't that this somehow sort of His Holiness descended from the heavens, the holiness part of His Holiness. It involved hard work. And it is that hard work that continues till today. So at age 80, he isn't sitting back on his wisdom and his knowledge and the manner in which he is celebrated around the world, but continues to engage in several hours of practice every day. And what is that practice? The practice, again, is first training the mind, cultivating compassion using the techniques of training the mind, so it's not just an intellectual understanding of compassion, but as we see manifest in His Holiness, is that it represents His deepest reflexive responses. And that is the genius of the heritage that he embodies. It's not merely all here, but it's here and here. And those of us who've had the privilege of spending some time with His Holiness and watching him, his education has meant that he, more than anyone else that we know of, actually lives and walks his talk. And that is this ancient tradition of Nalanda and of the Indian sages that traveled to Tibet and that he embodies. So as I mentioned to those of you who were here yesterday, that the Dalai Lama is celebrated not just for what he says or what he writes, but who he is. And that who he is really the aspiration of the education system that he represents, so the techniques and processes of education. And having said that, we have a living example, an embodiment of that aspiration, and that is what gives us hope and confidence that in our own human striving, that is attainable and achievable. It's not something out there. It's here, living on stage. And in our humility, in our lack of self-confidence, we might believe that it's not possible. But His Holiness teaches us that it is. And so the Buddha was not the final word, and there have been many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that have followed, because what the Buddha taught, as the Dalai Lama does, that the same aspiration that he has for himself is possible for all of us. And so we celebrate His Holiness, and he must be tired of being wished a happy birthday, because I know we all like to prize ourselves on the first celebrations, but I think that was on March the 23rd in New Delhi that we started wishing him happy birthday. So let's just say a happy 80th birth year, Your Holiness. And I yield to my very good friend, Bob Thurman, who has so masterfully bridged the West and the East, and was amongst His Holiness's first Western students, and is far more qualified than I am to talk about His Holiness's own journey and his own teachings.
Thank you. You two have been students of His Holiness. And it seems to me what has happened is that there's a possibility that we, as now the beneficiaries of this lesson that we've just heard, are going to have to be the ones carrying the message out, that it's not available to our students in schools. Rajiv, do you have something to say about what you've learned from His Holiness, specifically about how the path to compassion that everyone listening could potentially want to carry to their children, to their communities, so that this can expand? And because I think also with these leaders of these students here, all these people who lead young people and influence young people, that they might be able to benefit as well as they continue in their work.
Well, I'm not the best example of His Holiness's students, not a very successful one. But I think that there are specific techniques of mind training, of visualization, and I think that the practice in reality goes beyond merely mindfulness. So you have techniques such as exchanging oneself with others, which means that you first visualize your mother, assuming you don't have a neurotic relationship with your mother, and you visualize the mother's love, and then you replace assist the mother with somebody who's neutral and transfer those feelings to the person who's neutral, and then even to the enemy.
Even to the enemy.
To the enemy. And I remember that my first visit to Dharamsala in 1981, I was very moved by the fact that the monks, their prayer mat said, "Pray for the Chinese." And on the 10th of March, which was the anniversary of their escape into, His Holiness's escape into India, they started the ceremony with "May the veils of ignorance lift from the Chinese." So it was a juxtaposition of, even at the face of the greatest provocation, to cultivate through prayer at one level, compassion for the person who hates you most, and specific techniques and practices that would enable that. I think one of the challenges is that in education, that particularly in countries such as the United States, with their understanding of secularism, that some of these techniques and practices may have associations with being Buddhist. And that's why I think that's one of the reasons why His Holiness is so much at pains to emphasize the distinction between aspects that are Buddhist and those that are in the realm of psychology and science, and hence acceptable to the community. So I think in real terms, what educators in countries such as here are going to need to evolve are these techniques that will generate these in a more concentrated, intensive form, and that sort of mentioned briefly in my introduction, so that they become reflexive responses. So that they become, and I think that is the ultimate test, not just our considered actions, which are important, but how we reflexively respond to situations. And His Holiness often talks about how we need to change our mental diet. And so the more we change our mental diet consciously by acts of kindness or particular kinds of affirmations or prayers, that it begins to impact the consciousness, the mind matter, in a sense, so that that impact is more enduring. And so I think the challenge for education is to move beyond the conceptual, beyond the rhetorical, beyond the curriculum, to the experiential in deep and profound ways.
So the idea then, do you want to add something briefly to that, Bob?
Oh, me?
Yes.
Oh, well, I think Rajiv said very well, and although he said he's not the best student, I think he's more successful than me. Mm-hmm. Because His Holiness has taught me now for 51 years, and I continually fail to realize his teaching, so much so that actually my wife had to step in, and she has been very much my teacher over many years. And whenever I get out of hand and I'm not listening, which is one of my failings, she will always refer to His Holiness. "Oh, you will listen to His Holiness, but not to me."